The palace was silent when it happened. A royal guard, known for his unshakable discipline, suddenly lowered his weapon, let it fall to the polished marble floor, and stepped out of formation. Gasps rippled through the corridor. Guards stared. Advisors froze. And King Charles simply watched, but then the moment twisted. The guard's voice trembled as he said 5 words no one in the monarchy ever expects to hear. "Your Majesty, I can't continue." What followed didn't just break protocol. It broke the royal family's heart. If stories of loyalty, love, and hidden royal truths fascinate you, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. It helps more people discover incredible real-life moments from inside the royal world, and it means a lot to the channel. Now, let's step into a story that shook the palace to its core. The palace was unusually quiet that morning. Not silent. Buckingham Palace is never truly silent, but wrapped in that soft, dignified hush that settles over its long hallways before any official event. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, landing in warm gold patches on the polished marble floor. Footsteps echoed softly from distant corridors. Staff whispered. Pages hurried, and the royal guard stood in formation like statues carved from red and gold. But at the center of that calm stood a single man who felt anything but steady. Corporal Daniel Harrow had served the monarchy for 26 years. Reign, protests, royal births, royal scandals, state visits, funerals. He had witnessed every shade of the crown's public life without ever once breaking formation. He had endured long hours, icy weather, unbearable heat, and moments of real danger. He had followed orders even when they made his bones ache and his fingers numb. He was steady, reliable, invisible, in a way only the strongest servants can be. Until today, it began as a tremor, a tiny, uncontrollable shake in his hand. He told himself it was nothing. Stress, fatigue, lack of sleep. But the tremor spread to his arm, then his chest. His heartbeat raised itself like an alarm. His breath tightened. A whisper brushed the back of his mind. Not now, not here, you must hold it together. But his body refused him. In front of him, King Charles was finishing a private walkthrough before an important meeting. Advisors hovered behind him, waiting to discuss schedules, speeches, security procedures, all the mundane machinery that keeps a monarchy running. Charles, as he often did, moved with the quiet patience of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for duty. He walked past portraits of ancestors, paused briefly before a window overlooking the courtyard, and then continued down the hall. His gaze swept across the line of guards, and for a moment he looked almost peaceful. But then Daniel's world tilted. A sharp memory, uninvited and violent, crashed into him, screaming. Smoke, a metallic roar, a hand reaching through fire. A night he had buried so deeply he believed it would never claw its way back up. His breath hitched. His rifle slipped from his fingers, and the sound, that single metallic clatter, cracked through the hall like thunder. It echoed across marble. It froze advisors mid-step. It made 2 guards blink in absolute horror. One dropped weapon in the presence of a king wasn't just a mistake. It was unthinkable. A breach of image, of discipline, of tradition so strict it had not been broken in nearly half a century. Every head turned. Daniel stared at the weapon on the floor as though it belonged to someone else. His chest heaved. His eyes glossed. His throat closed. Corporal Harrow. The king's voice climbed gently over the silence. Daniel tried to answer, but no sound emerged. 2 guards moved to restrain him. Protocol demanded it, but Charles lifted his hand sharply. Stand down. The hall went still again. Charles stepped toward Daniel, and the closer he came, the clearer it was that he wasn't angry. He wasn't even confused. He was concerned. Daniel's jaw clenched. His shoulders trembled visibly now. Every part of his training screamed at him to straighten, apologize, reclaim his weapon, and pretend nothing had happened. But another part, the part he'd been bearing for years, began to rise, fueled by something heavier than fear. Exhaustion, not physical exhaustion. Soul exhaustion. Corporal, Charles said again, voice softer this time, look at me. Slowly, painfully, Daniel lifted his eyes. The king saw it instantly. Not disobedience, not disrespect, not weakness, but pain. Oh, pain. Deep pain. The kind that leaves its fingerprints on a man's life forever. Your Majesty, Daniel whispered. The words were shaky, almost childlike. Behind the king, an advisor stepped forward. Your Majesty, he must be escorted out immediately. This violates. Enough, Charles said quietly. The advisor froze. Charles took another step, close enough now that he could see the strain around Daniel's eyes, the quiver in his breath, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, close enough to see the cracks in a man who had never cracked before. What is happening? Charles asked softly. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat bobbing like he was trying to force the truth back down. But it didn't stay down, sir. His voice broke again. I can't do this anymore. A soft gasp came from someone in the hallway. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut like he was bracing for punishment, disgrace, removal, something unforgiving and royal. Instead, Charles's voice came low and steady. Tell me what you mean. Daniel opened his eyes. Tears rimmed them. Not tears of weakness, tears of someone who had held too much for too long. My duty, Daniel whispered. My silence. My promise to crown. It was supposed to be honorable, but it's killing me, sir. Charles's expression shifted. Not shocked, but deeply. Almost painfully aware, Daniel's lip trembled. His hand shook harder now, fingertips twitching like they were remembering something they had never wanted to remember again. Your Majesty, he said, barely audible, every time I raise this weapon, I see him. Charles straightened slightly, sensing the weight behind that sentence. Who? The king asked. Daniel's breath stuttered. The man I couldn't save. Whispers erupted behind them. Charles ignored them. Corporal, he said, look at me again. Daniel obeyed, and for the first time in decades, he stood not as a guard, not as a soldier, but as a human being who had been holding back a storm. You have carried this alone? Charles asked. A single tear slipped down Daniel's cheek. Yes, sir. Charles exhaled slowly, a sound of both recognition and sorrowed and shouting. No anger, no punishment, only understanding. But the moment wasn't over. The moment was only beginning. Because just as Daniel prepared himself to speak, to confess the secret he had buried for over 20 years, the palace doors at the end of the hall swung open. A woman rushed inside. She was out of breath, soaked from the rain, and clutching something to her chest, something wrapped in old twine, something clearly precious. Daniel's entire body seized. Amelia? He whispered. His daughter. She locked eyes with him, eyes full of urgency, fear, and fierce determination. Dad, she said, her voice trembling its time. The hall felt a shift instantly. Whatever she was carrying, whatever she had come to reveal, it was about to change everything. Even the monarchy, even the king, and especially the man who had just dropped his weapon. The palace hall had already been tense, but when Amelia stepped through those doors, drenched in the storm outside, the air shifted into something electric. Guards stiffened. Advisors exchanged rigid glances. King Charles turned fully toward her, sensing instantly that this was no ordinary intrusion. She wasn't frightened. She wasn't confused. She was determined. And determination always meant truth was about to surface. Amelia, Daniel whispered again, but this time his voice cracked not from weakness, but from fear, a fear far deeper than the fear of losing his position, his reputation, even his freedom. She didn't answer him. Instead, she walked right past the guards, right past the advisors who tried to intercept her, and came to a stop barely 2 meters from King Charles. Her fingers tightened around the object she carried, an old envelope, thick, brittle, sealed once with royal wax, long broken now. Charles froze. He knew that seal. He'd seen it on personal letters throughout his childhood, on private orders, on documents never meant for public eyes. It was the crest of his mother, Queen Elizabeth II. Charles's breath halted in his chest, and Daniel's knees nearly buckled. Amelia, where did you get that? He choked out. Her voice shook, but her eyes stayed steady. From Mom's things, after she passed. A cold silence fell. Daniel looked as if someone had reached into his chest and torn something open. His late wife, her absence still raw, had been the only person he ever wished he could tell the truth to, the only person he felt he had failed. And now her name was back in the air like a ghost. Charles stepped forward slowly, reading the weight in Amelia's expression. "You brought this here for a reason," he said gently. "Yes," Amelia whispered, "because my father can't keep drowning in a secret that was never his to carry." She turned to Daniel. "Mom found this letter 20 years ago," she said softly, "and she never told you." Daniel's face collapsed with shock. What? No. She couldn't have. "She didn't want to break your promise," Amelia continued, voice trembling. "She knew you gave your word to the Queen. She knew it would tear you apart to choose between duty and honesty. So she buried it. She kept it in a drawer under her shawls, wrapped exactly like this." A strangled sound escaped Daniel's throat. "She carried this alone," Amelia whispered. "Just like you." Charles closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the weight of every word. Duty, love, silence. 3 things a monarchy always touched, yet never fully understood. He extended his hand toward Amelia. "May I?" Charles asked. She hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect, then carefully placed the envelope into the king's hand. His fingers brushed the old paper, and for a moment his breath caught. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. "For the eyes of my son, if fate allows." His mother's voice echoed in his memory. Calm, regal, purposeful. She always planned ahead, always foresaw storms before they hit, always made preparations for the shadows she feared might one day rise. Charles opened the envelope. The paper inside was aged, edges yellowed, creases worn soft from years of being handled, hidden, reconsidered. He unfolded it slowly, almost reverently. Daniel stared, chest heaving. Amelia held her breath. And then the king began to read. His eyes moved line by line. The hall went utterly still. The only sounds were the faint ticking of the antique clock and the softness of the rain outside. As Charles read, his expression changed: confusion, realization, sorrow, regret, and then something darker, something heavy. When he reached the final line, his hand trembled just slightly. He folded the paper carefully and looked up. "Corporal Harrow," Charles said quietly, "how long have you carried this burden?" Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. 24 years, sir." "You never spoke of it, not once." "I was ordered not to," Daniel said, "by your mother herself. And she told me breaking that vow would bring consequences I couldn't risk." His voice quivered. "My wife never understood. She thought I was hiding something terrible from her. She thought the distance was my choice." "And you let her think that?" An advisor snapped before catching himself. Daniel flinched but didn't defend himself. Amelia did. He let her think nothing. He was forced to think silence made him loyal, she said sharply. He obeyed a command that destroyed his marriage and broke the man he used to be. Charles turned to his advisors with a single look that silenced them completely. Then he shifted his attention back to Daniel. "She wrote here." The king began slowly, lifting the letter, "that what happened that night, the night no one knows about, the night erased from public record, was never your fault, that you saved a life, a royal life." Daniel stared at the floor, shame and memory pressing heavily on his spine. Amelia clenched her jaw. "She wrote," Charles continued, voice thickening, "that she ordered you to remain silent because she believed revealing the truth would destabilize the monarchy during a fragile time, that protecting the crown meant bearing the costs paid by those who served it." His fingers curled slightly around the letter. "And she wrote," he added softly, "that she regretted it." Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" Charles nodded, eyes glistening. "She wrote that asking you to carry this alone was her greatest mistake, that she wished she had found another way, that she hoped one day I, or the next sovereign, would make this right." Daniel's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Amelia touched his arm gently. Charles exhaled slowly. "She also wrote," he continued, voice tightening with emotion, "that the truth must eventually come out, that the crown cannot heal if the people serving it are left to suffer in silence." Another heavy pause. "And she wrote," he said, "that when I read this letter, I must find the man who bore the weight of that night and free him. Daniel took a step back, as if the world had tilted beneath him. Your Majesty, he whispered, voice breaking, I only ever tried to— Charles raised a hand, stopping him. I know, he said softly. I know what you tried to do, what you were forced to do, what you lost. His eyes flicked briefly to Amelia, her grief, her anger, her loyalty all bare and unhidden. Then he looked back at Daniel. What happened that night? The king asked gently. Daniel closed his eyes. His voice, when it came, was a raw wound. It was supposed to be routine, he whispered. A charity event, a crowded room, a man hiding in plain sight, and a moment, a single moment, when I had to choose between protocol and saving a life. Charles stepped closer. Say it, he said quietly. No more silence. Daniel opened his eyes, and for the first time in 24 years, he prepared to tell the truth. The truth Queen Elizabeth had hidden. The truth that had broken family. The truth that was about to reshape the monarchy. He inhaled sharply. And then, I remember the gun, he whispered. The hall braced itself. Because the story he was finally ready to tell was one the crown had spent decades trying to bury. The moment Daniel said the word gun, the atmosphere in the hall tightened like a held breath. Even the chandeliers above seemed to stop shimmering. King Charles stepped closer, not out of authority, but out of unmistakable human concern. Take your time, Charles murmured. You're safe now. Truly safe. Safe. A word Daniel hadn't felt in decades. He let out a fragile breath, one that quivered with memory. Amelia gripped his forearm, grounding him with warmth, anchoring him to the present. Daniel nodded, swallowed, and began. It was 24 years ago, he said, voice trembling. You were still the Prince of Wales. We were assigned to a charity gala at St. William's Hall. Routine work. Crowds, cameras, nothing unusual. His eyes unfocused, drifting backward through time. You were greeting guests, and I was positioned near the east balcony, a good vantage point. I remember hearing laughter, hearing glasses clink, and then he paused, fist tightening. I saw him. Who? Charles asked gently. A man who wasn't looking at you the way the others were. Daniel's voice hardened, not with admiration, not with curiosity, with intent. The hall went absolutely still. I saw his hand slide into his coat, Daniel continued, and I knew instantly what was about to happen. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize. He just stated the fact, quietly, painfully, as if the memory itself had fangs. He pulled out a pistol, aimed it at your head. Several advisors gasped. One staggered back. Amelia stiffened. Charles didn't flinch. And you acted? He asked softly. Daniel nodded, jaw trembling. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I just moved. I stepped between you and the gunman. His voice cracked. And the moment I did, he fired. Amelia inhaled sharply, eyes flooding. Daniel touched his chest, right where the bullet scar still lived. The shot hit me, he whispered, knocked the breath out of me. Felt like a sledgehammer. I stumbled, but I didn't fall. The crowd screamed. More shots were coming. I could see it in his eyes. Charles's throat worked as he swallowed. So you stop him, he said gently. Daniel nodded again, slower this time. I drew my weapon and fired before he could take his second shot. His voice dropped to a whisper. He collapsed right there, in front of everyone, in front of his wife, his daughter. I still see their faces. His hand shook violently. I took a life to save yours. Charles's breath escaped in a soft, pained exhale. How long did you spend blaming yourself? He asked quietly. Daniel closed his eyes. Every day since. Amelia squeezed his arm. And then, Daniel continued, while the chaos unfolded, your mother arrived. Calm, controlled, unshaken. She took command instantly. Charles's eyes widened slightly. She told security to remove the body quietly. Daniel said, told staff to usher guests out, ordered all cameras confiscated. Every witness was told it was a mechanical shock from stage equipment, not a gun. An advisor muttered, "My God." And then, Daniel whispered, voice tight, the Queen took me aside. He swallowed. She told me the truth couldn't leave that room, that revealing the attempt would spark panic, inspire copycats, endanger you further, damage the monarchy. Charles listened, shoulders heavy, absorbing every word. She gave me two choices, Daniel said. Sign an agreement binding me to silence, or be held responsible for excessive force, because nothing would exist on paper to prove I acted in defense. Amelia stared at her father in horror. You were threatened? She whispered. Daniel nodded. Your mother wasn't cruel, he said quickly, not wanting to tarnish a sovereign he respected deeply. She was protecting you, and she believed secrecy was the only way. Charles exhaled slowly. His face softened with sorrow. And so, Daniel said, I chose silence. He trembled again. And my wife, your mother, he whispered to Amelia, knew something was wrong. She saw the nightmares, the distance, the way I couldn't explain why loud noises made me jump. But I couldn't tell her, and she thought the worst. Amelia's eyes filled. She thought you didn't trust her. Daniel nodded, voice breaking, and I let her die thinking that. Charles closed his eyes. When he opened them, they shone. Corporal Harrow, he said slowly, voice thick with emotion, what was done to you, what you were forced to endure, that was not loyalty. That was sacrifice. A sacrifice no one should ever have had to make. Daniel shook his head. It was my duty, sir. No, Charles said firmly. Your duty was to protect, not to be destroyed. The king looked around the hall, at every advisor, every guard, every witness. This, he said, is precisely what must change. No one dared breathe. Charles stepped closer, placing a hand gently on Daniel's shoulder, a gesture no protocol manual would ever approve. You saved my life, he whispered, yet the cost fell on you. Your wife deserved the truth. Your daughter deserved the truth. You deserve the truth. Daniel's chin quivered. Tears finally broke free, sliding silently down his cheeks. Charles softened. You will not face consequences, the king said. Not today. Not ever. An advisor stammered, Your Majesty, protocol. Protocol, Charles cut in sharply, is not more important than humanity. Silence. Pure, undeniable silence. From this moment, Charles continued, voice firm but deeply emotional, you are relieved of service, not in disgrace, but with honor. Full pension, full recognition, full support. Daniel stared at him, stunned. I will clear your name publicly, Charles said. I will address the press myself, and I will tell them the truth your silence protected. Tears streamed down Amelia's face. And, Charles added quietly, you will receive whatever care you need. Therapy, treatment, rest, healing. The crown will cover everything. Daniel's breath shook. Your Majesty, why? Charles's eyes softened. Because you have protected me long enough, he whispered. It is my turn to protect you. Daniel fell to one knee, not out of duty, but out of emotional collapse. Amelia knelt beside him, holding him fiercely. Charles stepped closer, almost instinctively reaching out. And in that moment, with one man trembling, one daughter holding him together, and a king breaking the chains of decades-old silence, something profound shifted inside Buckingham Palace. Not the walls, not the tradition, not the monarchy itself, but the heart of it, the heart that had been buried under duty for far too long. The storm outside the palace seemed dissolved, as if the sky itself understood that something inside Buckingham Palace had shifted, something ancient, heavy, and long overdue. The rain eased, light pressed against the windows, and inside, 3 people remained kneeling on the marble floor. Daniel Harrow, trembling but unburdened, Amelia, holding her father with fierce, protective love, and King Charles, standing close enough that tradition itself felt as though it were holding its breath. The silence was deep, emotional, human. Stand, both of you, Charles said softly. Daniel tried, but emotion made his legs weak. Amelia helped him rise, brushing a shaky hand down his sleeve as if trying to wipe away 24 years of pain. Charles stepped forward, careful, deliberate, "Corporal Harrow," he said, "I want you to understand something. You may have served under the crown, but today, you stand as my equal." Daniel blinked rapidly. "Your equal, sir?" Charles nodded. "Yes, because only an equal can carry a burden this heavy. Only an equal can make such a sacrifice." Daniel lowered his gaze, overwhelmed. "And now," Charles continued, "I will do my duty just as you did yours." He turned to his advisors, who were standing rigidly behind them. "Summon the press," the king ordered. "Assemble the Royal Communications Office. Inform the security detail that we will be giving a live statement at the palace steps within the hour." The advisors exchanged startled glances. This was unheard of, but none dared question it. Charles faced Daniel again. "Will you stand beside me?" he asked. Not as a king asking a guard, as one man asking another. Daniel's throat tightened. I will try, Your Majesty." "You won't try," Amelia whispered, threading her fingers to her father's. "You'll do it. You don't have to be strong alone anymore." Daniel breathed out slowly, a breath of acceptance, a breath of release. "Then yes," he whispered to the king, "I'll stand with you." Charles nodded, and something in his expression softened further, as if a weight he didn't know he carried had begun to lift too. 40 minutes later, the palace courtyard was a sea of reporters' cameras, flashing lights, umbrellas, and murmuring crowds. Rumors had already begun to swirl. A breach, a breakdown, an incident within the palace walls. No one knew the truth. No one expected what was coming. The palace doors opened, and the king walked out. Beside him, in uniform back straight but eyes raw, walked Corporal Daniel Harrow. Amelia walked one step behind, hands clasped, holding steady not just her father, but herself. Gasps rippled across the crowd. Cameras went wild. Charles raised his hand for silence. It fell thick and anticipatory. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice steady, carrying through the courtyard with quiet authority. "Today, I must share a truth long hidden, a truth that should never have been concealed." Daniel bowed his head slightly, emotional but composed. Charles continued, 24 years ago, during a charity event, my life was nearly taken. An armed man attempted to assassinate me in a crowded room. Shock exploded across the press line. Shouts, whispers, frantic scribbling. But Charles didn't pause. The attempt was stopped by one man, a man who put his life in front of my own, a man who took a bullet meant for me, a man who acted with bravery that cannot be taught, only given. He looked directly at Daniel. "That man," Charles said, "is Corporal Daniel Harrow." The crowd erupted, not with noise, but with a stunned, breathless silence. Charles went on. "Following the incident, my mother, Queen Elizabeth II, made a decision she believed was necessary for stability of the nation. She ordered the events of that day to be concealed. She commanded Corporal Harrow to remain silent. It was a decision made from duty, but it came at a terrible cost." He inhaled deeply. Daniel carried the scars, physical and emotional, alone. He bore the weight of a secret that changed the course of his life and the lives of his family. Daniel's eyes filled, but he didn't look away. "His wife," Charles said softly, "passed away never knowing the truth. His daughter grew up witnessing her father suffer without understanding why. And Daniel himself lived in silence, honoring command that cost him nearly everything." The crowd was still frozen, but now in empathy, not shock. "And so," Charles said, voice tightening with emotion, "I stand here today to do what should have been done years ago." He turned to Daniel. "Corporal Harrow," Charles said, "on behalf of the crown and with the deepest sincerity, I apologize." A collective gasp echoed across the courtyard. Kings do not apologize, but this one did. "To ask a man to save a life is duty," Charles said. "To ask him to destroy his own in the process is cruelty, and cruelty has no place in the modern monarchy." Daniel's jaw trembled. Amelia pressed her hand to her mouth. Charles continued, "Let it be known that Corporal Harrow acted with honor, with courage, with selflessness. He is to receive the Royal Cross of Valor, full pension, lifetime psychological support, and permanent recognition in the history of this nation." He paused, then added something that shocked even Daniel. And the man he saved, Charles looked directly into Daniel's eyes, will forever be in his debt. Daniel broke, but not with pain, with release. Tears streamed down his face, not out of shame, but out of healing. The king wasn't finished. From this day forward, Charles declared, no member of the royal guard, the armed forces, or the palace staff shall be required to carry trauma in silence. Mental health support will be provided without secrecy, without shame, and without fear. The courtyard buzzed, the first whispers of a historic shift. This, Charles said, is the beginning of a new era for the crown, one built on compassion, transparency, and humanity. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. The cameras captured it, a king not above, but beside a man who saved his life. Thank you, Corporal, Charles whispered, for everything. And for the first time in 24 years, Daniel Harrow smiled, a small smile, a fragile smile, but a real one. Later that evening, long after the press had left and the palace had fallen quiet again, Daniel sat in a small private study with Amelia beside him. The medal the king had pinned to his uniform rested on the table, gleaming gently under the lamplight. I don't know who I am without the secret, Daniel murmured. Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder. You're my father, she said softly, and now you finally get to be him again. Daniel let out a long, trembling breath, and for the first time in decades, it wasn't heavy. It was free. Outside, the sky cleared completely, unveiling a quiet, peaceful dawn. A new day. And inside Buckingham Palace, a man who had once been defined by silence finally began to reclaim his voice. A guard healed, a daughter exhaled, and a king rewrote the legacy of a monarchy, not with tradition, but with truth.